Remember that old saying, be kind, rewind? Well, the first 3 episodes, folks, you have been kind, and you have listened to Retro Wrestling Rewind. And you thought the first 3 episodes were great? You ain't heard nothing yet. Episode number 4 is probably the best one yet. And it's all because of this introduction.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Jim Crockett Promotions, welcome to the premier wrestling event of 1986, Starrcade 86, the night of the Skywalkers.
Welcome in to Retro Wrestling Rewind, episode number 4. Yes, folks, we made it to episode number 4. As always, I am one half. That's 50% of the greatest broadcast team in the history of this great sport. I am David Fine, alongside my tag team partner, Alex G. Man, Alex, we picked a great year and a great show to cover. Welcome into episode number 4.
Glad to be back, as always.
Yeah, I mean, it's always nice to hear your voice and to know that we've made it to episode number 4, which is great. It's 1986. It's Starrcade. But before we get into the meats and the potatoes, the card, if you will, the 12 matches on Starrcade 86, we're going to kind of lead up to Starrcade 86, the night of the Skywalkers. The show was a good show, and it could have been a better show until Magnum TA happened to get into an accident in his car, in his Porsche. They wrapped it around a telephone pole, and he was out of Starrcade 86. Leading into Starrcade 86, they said, oh, you know, he'll probably recover. Well, we all know 2018, he is still not really the same Magnum TA as he was back in 1986, pre the wreck in October of 86. But just tell everyone, listen, I mean, your thoughts and how much Magnum TA's accident leading into Starrcade 86, I mean, it changed the landscape of Starrcade 86, of course, because it changed the main event, but it changed the landscape of the National Wrestling Alliance from October 86 on.
Yeah, man. I think the first thing you want to talk about is not only did Magnum wrap his car around a telephone pole, the pole actually fell and then landed on his head, which broke his neck. So he was paralyzed, basically, I believe it was his left side. It was, basically completely done. He was in the hospital for quite a long time. He didn't actually get up and start walking again until January of 87. But overall, if you look at this card, I mean, everyone says that it was supposed to be Ric Flair taking on Magnum TA in the main event. We're not 100% sure if Magnum was going to take the title here. If you're going to use logic here, yes, he was going to take the title here.
Yeah.
But this, for me, looking around again, I'm very big on watching the televisions. So I like to watch 6 weeks before the event, 6 weeks after the event. And the biggest thing that stands out to me is, number one, is that how well they handled this accident. Now, professional wrestling in general doesn't really handle tragedies all that well. They usually exploit them, and they're usually done in poor taste. And, if you watch any time the WWE or even World Class have done anything concerning, their tragedies, they're not done well. But I think this is, to Dusty's credit here, this was Dusty's best friend, so they handled it with a lot of class and a lot of dignity, and they really did a lot of things to, make sure that the fans were updated appropriately, and they didn't really turn this into an angle. They didn't exploit it like many other promotions would have. I think some other promotions would have said, oh, Tully Blanchard cut the brake lines and tried to kill Magnum, and they would have been off and running, but they didn't do that here, which is good. So I definitely appreciate that. This time in 1986, we were at the peak of Jim Crockett Promotions. This is the peak. There's decline in 87, and they go off the rails in 88. But this is Jim Crockett Promotions at its peak, at its highest level. Dusty's booking around this time here. Again, it's amazing what he can do. Again, he's doing what he can to make sure that everything goes the right way. Doing a lot of panic booking, a lot of shifting. Again, this is pretty much Dusty at his peak as a booker before he goes off the rails himself. So I think the car accident had a lasting effect on the National Wrestling Alliance, but I think it may be overblown a little bit because I think a lot of people assume, and there's evidence to support that Magnum would have been the guy moving forward. I don't think Dusty was going to let a babyface go over him. So I think Dusty would have been the number one babyface regardless. Magnum would have most likely had a 2 or 3 month title run, and then the belt would have went back on the Flair anyway. So I'm not sure what the impact would have been. If it was me booking personally, I would have sent Flair away. Flair would have went away to the AWA or something like that and let Magnum stand on his own for a while just to bring Flair back. But again, I think overall, I mean, this show is stacked to the gills with fantastic wrestling action. And again, I think it's much better. If you compare it just to WrestleMania 2 and that card, this card blows it out of the water.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny when you look at this, leading up to Starrcade '86, which it was the last Starrcade where they had a split show. It was in Greensboro and in Omni in Atlanta. And you could, of course, watch it on closed circuit TV around the country. What was your thought on, was this a panic booking at the end to turn Nikita Koloff babyface? I mean,
it was freaking brilliant.
I mean, it was
brilliant. It was. No one saw it coming. No one saw it coming, and that's the first time we ever saw a Russian character, Cold War communist character, turn babyface.
I mean,
it worked. It's amazing.
I mean, the funny thing is, I was watching the TV leading up, and when Dusty came, or when because they kind of set it up where it was going to be Dusty and a mystery partner versus J.J. Dillon and Ole Anderson, and I think maybe Tully Blanchard. It was in a cage. It was in Charlotte, and
Tully was hurt because the week before that is when Dusty literally tries to murder Tully Blanchard and destroys his knee with Magnum. That's just one of the most violent attacks perpetrated by a babyface I've ever seen.
But the funny thing about that is that I know you saw on the TV leading up, they had the angle where they had the guy in the car with JJ, and they were following to Dusty to Crockett, and they started beating the crap out of him, and they broke his hand, and but the funny thing is, I mean, it was 1986, and like you said, it was the middle of the Cold War, and people, there wasn't the internet. It was many years before the internet, and so people, they thought it was real. I mean, but the funny thing is, he came out there and they started chanting Nikita. I mean, it was like a sudden switch. I mean, the week before, 2 weeks before, they hated him. Yeah. But he comes out with
on that same show. He was a heel on that show earlier in the night too. So,
but I mean,
I think they looked at Nikita as sort of like the Road Warriors, where you had this big hulking badass, and I think the fans at the time really wanted to cheer for him, and this gave him the excuse to cheer for him. So, and they went nuts.
But I'm not sure how they figured it out, or they probably just dropped it in there and they put him in the world title match with Ric Flair. No explanation. They didn't. They just announced the match, and it was brilliant. It was brilliant on their end, and the way they kind of set up the entire show. The first match they had announced was the hair versus hair match. Paul Jones putting his hair on the line against Big Mama's hair, and the promos with Jimmy Valiant, and he's out on the street, and and then Big Mama comes up in the car. I was watching it, and my wife was
like, "Why is he in a station wagon? Why does Jimmy Valiant have a station wagon with flames on it?"
And the funny thing is, I was watching it, and my wife was like, "What in the hell are you watching?" I'm like, "This is classic 1986 NWA." I mean, Jimmy Valiant. He was in a great angle with Paul Jones.
Forever, by the way. It seemed like they'd gone on forever.
And then the other match that they set up, they had the Indian strap match with Rick Rude versus Chief Wahoo, as they call him, Chief Wahoo McDaniels, or Wahoo McDaniel, as he's normally called. And I think some of the stuff that the references, they were the Indian reference, the red face, the, all this, doing the, the kind of the Indian terms, I don't think would be kind of PC now, but it was back in '86. They didn't care. Then of course they set up the Skywalker scaffold match, and I just thought it was funny how Road Warrior Animal and Hawk, they went out to a construction site and threw the pumpkins off the scaffold. I mean, I'll give it to the NWA. They know how to build up stuff. I mean,
plus the Road Warriors weren't even there. The Road Warriors were in Japan leading up to this show, so they taped all these things beforehand.
And then the funny thing is, was that I think it was Animal who got hurt on his tour of Japan, and so
Hawk broke his leg.
Hawk broke his leg. So they did an angle where they hurt him, and they were out for a little bit, and they it was just brilliant. I mean, it's just brilliant, booking on Dusty's part and whoever else was in the booking committee back then. But let's talk about. Is there anything else you would like to talk about? Kind of leading up to Starrcade '86 the kind of any nuggets that you. In your research and watching 6 weeks up, advance of Starrcade that you got before we go into the meat and potatoes of the of Starrcade '86?
I think they tell the Blanchard versus Dusty Rhodes, the first blood match. The lead up to that, when we talk about that the turn for Nikita, a lot of people forget that Dusty came off the top rope and smashed JJ Dillon in the face with his cast because he had the broken hand. And JJ had like plastic surgery on his face, so when they brought him back on TV, his face is all jacked up, which I thought was a nice touch to kind of explain why JJ kind of looks that way. But I think the Tully Blanchard, Dusty Rhodes with Baby Doll, all that stuff is amazing. I mean, Tully Blanchard is such a good heel, and it's almost ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, he was definitely. I think he was better heel than babyface, but that's just. That's just my.
I don't remember a time when he was ever babyface. Maybe in Southwest early in his career, but he's not. He's a heel. He's like one of the most unlikable characters, and in some cases at the time, one of the most unlikable people. I'm turning his life around now, and he's pretty likable now. But back in the day, he was just a jerk.
Yeah, I mean, and if everything that Ric Flair, the rumor and innuendo of stuff that he was not. He was one of the dirtiest players in the game, in wrestling and in life. But he's, like you said, he's turned his life around. But let's talk about the show. It was a split show. It was from Greensboro and Omni in Atlanta. They kind of ping pong back and forth because they had the first match and they had the next match. It was unlike 1991's Great American Bash where they had to take down the Skywalker scaffold. They kept it up because they were in two different locations. The first match, we had Tim Horner and Nelson Royal taking on Rocky and Don Kernoble. What were your thoughts on this match? It went 7 minutes and 30 seconds to open up Starrcade '86. It's
funny how low in the card Don Kernoble had become. Again, he was in those big angles with him and Slaughter taking on Steamboat and Youngblood a couple years prior. Not to see him like really low down on the card here, to me is pretty amazing. Again, Tim Horner is Tim Horner, White Lightning. And Nelson Royal's like a cowboy type guy, which after this show he goes on to explain the rules of this bunkhouse stampede. He's like in the woods for some reason, by a fire, and explaining the rules of the bunkhouse stampede, which is kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, I didn't understand that. Okay, so. I'm sure you had the copy. You had the VHS copy of Starrcade '86, and I don't remember, but on the network version, they had like where they took an intermission. They may have done it on the VHS version, and that's where they had the Nelson Royal talking about the bunkhouse stampede, which I guess was the next big event after Starrcade '86.
Yeah, the Bull of the Woods with Dusty won them all apparently.
Yeah, so. that was just a weird promo, but I mean it was Nelson Royal in 1986. I mean, I
agree.
I mean, the first match, kind of throw it away. I kind of give it a 1. If I could get less than a 1, I'd probably do that. Next match, we had Brad Armstrong taking on gorgeous Jimmy Garvin, along with the very vivacious Precious.
I prefer Sunshine, but that's just me personally.
But the funny thing is, I'd take them both. But I mean, anybody but Big Mama, because anyway, but we won't go into that. I'm sure she was a nice lady, or maybe it's still a nice lady if she's still around. But before this, we had Brad Armstrong. He wasn't in the program with Jimmy Garvin. Didn't they have the program was Magnum TA versus gorgeous Jimmy Garvin? Correct?
Yeah, which is weird. It was literally the week of his accident. I think Jimmy Garvin was the last match that he had. And I'm always curious about how they were going to transition Magnum away from Garvin towards Flair, but they never did it. So we don't know how that would have kind of ended up. Like, how would Magnum get the shot at Flair at Starrcade? But I think Jimmy Garvin this is prototypical. Like, everyone likes Jimmy Garvin at this point. When Jimmy Garvin joins the Freebirds a couple of years later is where I have a couple of issues. But Jimmy Garvin right now is fantastic. Yeah, that Brainbuster was amazing.
The funny thing is, because because since I mean I'm a fan of the '80s. That's when I first started watching. Back in 1985 was my introduction to professional wrestling. It's funny watching it on the network. Back, the network feed is they take out most, if not all, the themes from the wrestlers, and just seeing Jimmy Garvin kind of dance to the generic music they have on the network.
Yeah,
now,
it's weird.
I'm like, it fit back then, but now it's just back then they didn't really care about copyright, so they just played whatever. And I guess now they got to play by the copyright rules, so
they don't want, WWE does not want to play those royalties on those songs, which can be a hefty fee.
I mean, what were your thoughts on this match? I mean, what would you give it a 1 out of 10? I mean, it was the second match.
It's a 15-minute draw, which is fine. Brad Armstrong's a hell of a worker. Jimmy Garvin is at his peak, at his prime here. A good overall match, to kind of get the show going. Again, there's no necessarily any big stakes on this match. Again, the stakes will come later, but I think overall it's a pretty good match.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't bad, but the next match was an interesting one. They had Hector Guerrero, of course, you know him later on as Lasertron, and Baron Von Raschke taking on Shaska Watley and the Barbarian. The funny thing is, Baron Von Raschke was, of course, as you know, was in Paul Jones's army. Yeah. He turned, I guess, babyface, and they turned on him. What were your thoughts on Hector and Baron's? I mean, their work rate. I mean, Shaska was good. I mean, Pistol Pez Watley, and the Barbarian is just the Barbarian. I mean, this is more of the Paul Jones kind of angle here, where you have a Baron Von Raschke, which they're trying to kind of work out of the promotion here. They turn him babyface, which again is a little bit weird and slightly off-putting to see people cheering this Nazi, which is different. But it happens all the time when the Baron becomes the babyface. Again, Hector Guerrero, fantastic worker. We all know what he can do in the ring. And then we have Shasta Watley, who's not afraid to dress and drag, much like Ronnie Garvin. And we have the Barbarian, who, again, is still, I wouldn't even use the word green because I think it's disrespectful to the Barbarian at this point. But, he's not as good as what he would become later on. I'll have to say.
But again, this is a nice, it's a feud match. There's some stakes involved here. So, no issues overall with this match. Pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, it was good. And I mean, all I can think about it, the Barbarian is now Tommy Young.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it's just, I give this match probably 5 out of 10. It was good, but it was a 7 minutes and 25 seconds. So it's
perfectly acceptable wrestling here.
It's and speaking of, I'd say in the middle wrestling, we had Crusher Khrushchev and Ivan Koloff. They were the current reigning and defending United States Tag Team Champions. Of course, we know that the U.S. Tag Team titles were they came up with them in a tournament after the National Tag Team titles were vacated and defunct after Ole Anderson got hurt. They defeated the Candice Jayhawks, Bobby Jaggers, and as you know,
people love the Jayhawks. They keep on talking about it. They weren't very long. They weren't around for very long, but people love the Jayhawks for some reason. Anytime like you hear the name Bobby Jaggers, like, oh, Kansas Jayhawks. This is like, okay.
And the funny thing, I just think a Dutch Mantel, Zeb Coulter, aka, a great manager now. It's just, I just couldn't. And with
Dutch Mantel was the prototype Steve Austin. If you watch his work in Memphis, you can see where the Stone Cold Steve Austin character kind of came from, where Dutch wasn't necessarily a babyface or a heel. He was like, I need to win matches to get money. I don't care what I do. And the fans really took to his no nonsense. He wasn't a babyface. He wasn't a heel. He was just someone who wanted to be the best and wanted to make all the money. Yeah, I mean, the funny thing about this match, at least with Crusher, I mean, when he talked and Ivan talked, of course, Ivan, had the Russian accent, but Crusher. They didn't explain it. They didn't explain it in Crockett. They explained it in Mid-South. But when Khrushchev came over to Crockett, they never explained it that Crusher Khrushchev wasn't Russian. Crusher Khrushchev was a Russian sympathizer. And there's a whole big angle. When we do Mid-South, we'll explain the whole angle. But essentially, he was Crusher Darso for a while, and then he ended up teaming up with Nikolai Volkov and then became Crusher Khrushchev. But when they brought him into Crockett, they never explained any of that stuff. So it was weird when you hear him talk where he has no accent or anything. Yeah, he's not Russian. He's not from Minnesota.
He's not Russian. And it's just, I guess assume that the fans would be dumb enough to believe that, and I
Well,
guess
I think the Mid South TV was on TBS at this time, '86. Yeah.
yeah, it
So
was.
it's a good possibility they may have seen it, but they never really explained it.
Yeah, I mean, what were your thoughts on this match? I mean,
I feel bad for Uncle Ivan. Uncle Ivan is way down on the card now. Again, Nikita turned babyface, and poor Uncle Ivan is way down on the card. I mean, if Matt didn't have his accident, maybe they would have kept Nikita heel. Ivan would have been his manager for these world title matches that he would have got down the road. And now, Uncle Ivan is fourth on the card in a United States tag team match against the Kansas Jayhawks. So.
Yeah, and this match was had no disqualification, so they kept on hitting each other with a chain. With a whatever they called the bullwhip that the Kansas Jayhawks had. And it was just, I mean, it was.
I don't think any of those guys are from Kansas. I don't think Bobby Jaggers or Dutch Mantel are from Kansas. Actually, I think Dutch is from Oil Trough, Texas.
Yeah, and I think, and actually Ivan is from Minnesota, or one of those states up in. It's just weird.
I think he's Canadian.
He's from somewhere that's really cold.
Yeah, he's
all
Canadian.
The time. He from somewhere that's really cold all the time. But moving on to the next match, we had Chief Wahoo McDaniel defeated the ravishing one Rick Rude with Paul Jones in an Indian strap match, 9 minutes and 5 seconds. Of course, Wahoo McDaniel claimed that he had wrestled over 300, I think 50 or so strap matches and never lost. And of course, leading up to this, they were saying every stereotypical Indian derogatory.
Now, where's Manny Fernandez? Is he hurt on this show?
No, he is actually in one of the matches. Oh, in the hair versus hair match, he is. I don't know why he's not out there in the hair versus hair match. He's in the cage.
Right.
But I don't know why he's not. I don't know why he's not on the show, or he is not at this match.
Because he's not with Rude.
No, they haven't won the World Tag Team titles like they're gonna do in a little bit. But what were your thoughts on this match? I mean, it was an Indian strap match. It
was pretty good. I mean, Rude is still a little green. He would become a hell of a lot better worker in the years following this. And Wahoo is his prime was a couple of years before. So it's a nice little gimmick match. Again, this all has to do with Paul Jones and his shenanigans. And I think we said that WrestleMania 7 was like the Jimmy Hart show.
This is the Paul Jones show.
This is the Paul Jones show, because he's involved with so many angles on this show that it's pretty fun. Again, Indian strap match, those are fun. Plus you have Wahoo in there, who's notoriously stiff as hell, and Rude, who's a hell of a bumper. So again, overall, it's a fun match.
Yeah, I give it probably a 6 out of 10. It was pretty good. It wasn't the best match on the card, but it was definitely not the worst. It was not the Tim Horner Nelson Royal versus the Kanoto brothers, but that's we won't go into that. The next match was for the NWA Central States Heavyweight Championship. The champion Sam Houston, he took on superstar Bill Dundee. He won by disqualification in 10 minutes and 24 seconds. What were your thoughts on these different belts? They had the Central States Tag Team. They had the Central States Heavyweight Championship. They had another Central States title.
Since they're taking over these promotions, they took over St. Louis, they took over Kansas City, they took over Florida, they took over Georgia. So they have a lot of belts there incoming. That's not for nothing. They should have been unified pretty quickly, if not just dropped altogether. So having all these championships, kind of, the more belts you have, the more it dilutes the other championships that you have on your shows. So I'm not necessarily sure why they had a Central States Heavyweight Championship match on this show. I know that Houston was, in Kansas City working, and they're trying to bring in angles from other parts of the country. But I'm not a big fan of Sam Houston. I love Bill Dundee when he's in Memphis. Anywhere else, I'm not a big fan. But
you're not a fan of Bill Dundee, WCW, when he was English. He had the English accent, and he came out with William
Regal, and then Bobby Eaton, and then
God.
Chris Taylor.
So you're not a fan of the great Sam Houston and his work rate?
No, Sam Houston's probably on my list of crappiest wrestlers of all time. He's on there somewhere.
Wow. Yeah.
Does anyone think he's good? I just want to know. If I'm the only person in the world that doesn't think that Sam Houston is not a good wrestler. I mean, geez, let me know. Like, give me a match listing of him and his great matches or angles or feuds that he's ever in.
Yeah, no.
They
Speaking
don't
of,
exist.
well, on to the next match. Speaking of wrestlers who were obnoxious as hell, Jimmy the Boogie Woogie Man Valiant. Oh my God, he defeated Paul Jones. Imagine that in a hair versus hair match. Of course, he was with Big Mama, who this was 1986. She looked like she was about 86, but I mean, I'm not a fan.
She looked like a street person.
Are you trying to say
Jimmy Valiant was he had his street people, and she looked like a street person that would be hanging out with the Boogie Woogie Man. So I think it fit.
But I mean, the fun thing is, I mean, as we know nowadays, Jimmy Valiant still wrestles, and he's got a lot more tattoos than he did back then. And he used to be handsome, Jimmy Valiant. He is annoying as hell, Jimmy Valiant now. Well, I mean, what were your thoughts on this match? You went 4 minutes and 0.000 seconds. It went 4 minutes too long.
This is not necessarily a match where it's the angle afterwards where Manny gets out of the cage and Rude comes out and they beat the hell out of Jimmy Valiant. It's more to continue that feud. So we get the payoff of Paul Jones getting his hair shaved, yay! But we continue the feud because Manny Fernandez and Rick Rude beat the hell out of Jimmy Valiant. So
yeah, I mean,
but it was more of an angle than a match.
Yeah, and according to Tony Schiavone,
Jimmy was over. Jimmy Valiant. Was
no. I'll give it. He was over. The fans loved him, but Tony Schiavone always said on his podcast that sometimes he didn't know if and when Jimmy Valiant was going to come in for the old big schmooch on the lips, and he just I don't know. That's he's I think he's got he probably has a podcast. And I think he has a wrestling school, but since neither here nor there, what would you give this rating on this lovely hair versus hair match?
As an angle, it's probably like an 8 or 9. As a match, it's probably a 2 or 3.
Yeah, I would probably give that same match. Next match was interesting. Big Bubba Rogers, who would go on, of course, to be the big boss man in the WWF. He was with Jim Cornette. He defeated Ron Garvin in a street
not in drag for once. Jeez.
Ron Garvin. Oh yeah,
Ron loves to dress in women's clothes for whatever reason. He just seems to always be in women's clothing.
Hey, this is not. Hey, I don't judge people on this podcast. That's another podcast that we have. But this went 11 minutes and 50 seconds. What were your thoughts on this? The street fight?
This was a great brawl overall. Again, we start to see the greatness of Bubba Rogers' Big Boss Man Ray trailer. And, and Garvin is going to be Ronnie Garvin, and he's stiff as hell. But I really like this street fight. It was good overall. I did definitely enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, leading up to the next match. Of course, we had. It was the payoff of their angle. The Road Warriors.
Yeah, it was going on for quite. Well, you had the Road Warriors next, because I had Blanchard and versus Dusty next.
Oh, well, yeah, that would probably be good because I didn't have that on my card. That would be correct. The next match would be Dusty Rhodes versus Tully Blanchard for the NWA World Television title.
First blood match.
It was that match. Tully and Magnum used to have some great cage matches. I remember the I Quit match. What was it, Starrcade? Was it the Starrcade previous, or was it? I forgot which Starrcade it was.
It has to be 85.
And they
because it was Blanchard versus Steamboat.
They freaking bled. I mean, it was just they don't do that much, at least intentionally. They sometimes do it the hard way nowadays in the WWE, but they don't do a lot of bleeding anymore. But back then, man, they let the blood flow. I mean, it was like a faucet. They just turned it on and just. What were your thoughts on this match? It was really good. I mean, it was a great match.
I think this is the match that put the World Television Championship up on a high pedestal. For a long time, a lot of people held that championship in high regards, and I think this is the angle and this is the feud that kind of really pushed it up there. I mean, yes, by the time we got to the Nitro era, the World Television Championship declined to such a degree that Hacksaw Jim Duggan found it in a garbage can. But at this point, the World Television Championship, it's right up there. Like, In some cases, some people would say that you can put it above the United States Championship. But this match shows the greatness of not only Dusty Rhodes always, but Tully Blanchard is in his zone here, in his prime, ready to rock and roll. And this is the culmination of a long time, long build, and I think they nailed everything perfect on this.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those matches that it was a good payoff. It was a typical Dusty Rhodes match.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely. Yeah, I mean, I would back then. I would. Would you put the NWA World TV title a lot higher than the U.S. title, or do you?
It's close. I'm not saying that one's above the other, but it's close. Look at the people that's holding that championship. You have Dusty Rhodes and then Tully Blanchard. Those are really, really guys that were on top of the card. They're not putting the belt on Sam Houston.
I mean, they should have. They put the Central States title on him, but I mean, if you were with the booking, you wouldn't have put the Central States title on Sam Houston.
I would have probably unified that with I would have took all the territory championships, which would be the national championship, which was out of Georgia, the Florida State Championship, or I would have just unified them all with the United States Championship. Have like the new challengers, every month or what have you, and the new champion, and then we get unified with that belt and call that a day. Because when you're trying to go national like this, I understand what the NWA was trying to do, because a lot of these towns were weekly towns. Georgia was a weekly town, Florida was weekly, St. Louis was weekly, Kansas City was weekly, and they would try to fulfill the commitments of the weekly territory NWA stalwarts that they were known for. That does not jive with an attempt to go national at the same time. Vince wasn't necessarily worried about running a particular area weekly because it's been run weekly there forever. He didn't care. All alliances, all that's not the way he did his business. And I think the NWA and Jim Crockett Promotion specifically needed to get away from that. It's like, yes, we'll hit up the big buildings in Kansas City and in St. Louis and in Florida, but we're not going to be running these little towns either. It made no sense. So I would have got rid of all these championship belts.
Yeah, I mean, I would have definitely.
I wouldn't have thrown them in the garbage can. They would have been unified with something else, but I would have got rid of them as soon as possible.
Yeah, I mean, we'll kind of talk about the U.S. title when we come up to the main event of the evening. Next match that I prematurely talked about was the Road Warriors, Hawk and Animal, with Precious Paul Ellering. They defeated the Midnight Express with Jim Cornette and, of course, Big Bubba Rogers in the Skywalker Scaffold match in 7 minutes. And unlike the 1991 version, where also included Bobby Eaton, Pia News, and Steve Austin, stunning Steve Austin, they actually fell off Jim Cornette fell off it, and someone, the
entire Midnight Express fell off. From the bottom of it, but
yeah, they didn't fall from the top. They weren't sissies. They didn't have a capture the flag match, but I mean, and of course, Cornette was actually legitimately hurt when he fell.
He blew out his knee.
He blew out his knee.
Big Bob was supposed to catch him, but he dropped him.
Oops.
So he blew out his knee. And Dennis and Bobby were also hurt taking that bump as well.
What were your thoughts on this match? I mean, it was the first match that they had.
Historically, scaffold matches outside of Memphis are never good. This is the exception to that rule.
So you're trying to say that the scaffold match that they had at the Von Erich Memorial in Texas was not good?
Awful. And actually, the one they had the following year in '87 with the Rock and Rolls versus the Midnight is also awful as well. But this fit the characters. So you have the Road Warriors, and I think people were like, "Oh man, if Hawker and Animal take that bump, they're gonna be seriously injured." Obviously, I think everyone knew that the Midnights were going to take that bump, off the scaffold, and you have to have the bump. You can't have a scaffold match without the bump. I don't know how many times I explain that to people. You cannot have the match if you're not going to have the bump. That being said, great angle. I think Jim Cornette is a big foil for the Road Warriors. Like, you can see how a guy like Jim Cornette would drive the Road Warriors completely out of their minds. and they had really good matches. The Midnights were really good opponents. It might be the Road Warriors' best opponents.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely. It was. I mean, they've wrestled many incarnations of the Midnight Express.
Yeah.
Do you think this is the best? I'm a fan of the Randy Rose era of the Midnight Express. I'm sure you were a Sweet Stan Lane version.
I do like Sweet Stan's Lane.
How about a?
Are you a a Norville Austin version of the Midnight Express fan?
No, I like a Dennis Condrey, Beautiful Bobby. They're the ones that I kind of grew up on, and then they had the original Midnight Express with Paulie Dangerously.
Yeah.
There's many Midnight Expresses, but I think this one, I think this one kind of gelled well with the Road Warriors. I mean, they had a great angle. I mean, the Road Warriors back in the '80s had some great angles. They had the angle with the Barbarian and the Warlord, where they in the
thing with
challenge.
the Road Warriors, I think the mistake they did with the Road Warriors is they waited way too long to put the belts on them. Like, it was a long time before they got those World Tag Team Championships.
I mean,
a very long time.
It's kind of one of those things that I don't think they needed the titles to get over. I mean, it's kind of like, some people nowadays that don't need the title, like The Miz. He doesn't need a title to get over, but they give him the title because it gives him some kind of recognition. But, I mean, I thought it was a good match. I mean, 7 minutes, that's a little short for me, but I mean,
it's a scaffold match too. I mean,
yeah, I mean,
not going to see a 25-minute classic.
You're not going to see a lot of high spots up on the scaffold. So I mean, they were probably hesitant enough to go up there. Hopefully, their payday was better than some other.
I think Cornette said that it was either $5,000 or $10,000 for that match.
I mean,
that he got so.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully he got a lot more because freaking blew out his knee. But moving on, we had the cage match. Rock and Roll Express, Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson defeated the Anderson brothers. Of course, they were not related, but Ole and Arn Anderson in a cage match for the NWA World Tag Team titles. 20 minutes, 20 seconds.
Best match on the card, by the way.
You thought this
yeah
this got the award for best match of the night?
Yeah. Definitely. I think this is better. Obviously, the scaffold match is the scaffold match. I think this match is slightly better than Tully versus Dusty. But definitely the match on the card. Anytime you have the Rock and Rolls taking on the Andersons, it's going to be an amazing match. You throw the cage match on top of that, and then you throw the fact that it's for the NWA World Tag Team Championships on top of that. It's just a recipe for deliciousness and awesomeness. So, I love the Rock and Roll Express of this era. Again, they were not long for this world in terms of being a top act. They wouldn't go too far into 1987, but at this point, they're at their peak. So, Ricky and Robert, getting brutalized by the Minnesota Wrecking Crew. I wonder why they have them as the Anderson brothers and not as the Minnesota Wrecking Crew, because they weren't brothers.
I don't know.
Even in kayfabe, they weren't brothers. They were cousins.
Yeah, I mean, if in the introduction of the match, they were known as the Minnesota Wrecking Crew, Ole and Arn Anderson, which is, I mean, it's just.
They're not either from Minnesota either, which is hilarious.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it's wrestling in the 80s.
I love it. I love it.
It's. I mean, and speaking of loving it, we had the Ric Flair, the Nature Boy Ric Flair, who actually, I know he's not going to listen to this, but would like to congratulate him on another nuptials. He married his lovely girlfriend, the former Fifi, the maid. Yeah. I think it was like a week or so ago in a ceremony, an intimate ceremony that included Dennis Rodman, the Worm, the Undertaker, and of course, Michael Purely Sexy Hayes.
He's not a rock star.
Yeah, you heard that. I love that. God, last week, folks, if you have not heard last week's episode, the whole show is great. But at the end, I play the Freebirds' greatest hit, and of course, Alex G says that they're not.
What he's wearing at these pictures? He's wearing a pink suit. He looks like a pimp.
Oh
right?
no!
And then he has the fanny pack.
I mean, come on! I told somebody at work. I said, the only people that wear fanny packs are wrestlers. And why in the hell? What the hell does he have in that fanny pack? I mean, his brick phone. I mean, come on! I don't understand it, but
He looks ridiculous, but you kind of have to accept that it's Michael Hayes, and he's always going to look ridiculous. And if you invite Michael Hayes to your party, understand that's what he's going to dress like. Like you kind of want to, like, I want to invite him to my party just to see what he wears.
Just to see.
It's completely insane.
Oh God, yeah,
I'm pretty sure Dolph Ziggler walked Fifi down the aisle too.
I think she did, and there was Charlotte was there, bunch of other people. But I wish him all the best. She was, of course, with him with the Nature Boy and his hard times that he's had in the past year or so, and just kind of and Conrad Thompson was there along with Megan Flair. They're of course getting married in October. That should be fun to hear some of the shenanigans at his bachelor party that he invited Tony Schiavone to, and it's interesting. But that's another podcast. Just concentrate on our podcast. They had Ric Flair taking on Nikita Koloff. Of course, they turned Nikita babyface, and then they put him in the main event of Starrcade. How does that happen? I mean, other than the fact that he was probably best friends with the Booker, Dusty Rhodes, how does that happen? I mean,
is he the United States champion at the time?
He is the United States heavyweight champion.
He's technically, by the rules of the NWA, the #1 contender. Technically,
but I guess whenever building up Magnum was the he was the former U.S. champion, and then Nikita beat him, and then the title was they combined the NWA national title and the United States title, and so then he was the U.S. champion. I get that is true. He currently was the #1 contender, but it's just I think nowadays if that had happened, they'd be like you're playing favorites, but it's booking at 86.
I don't think there's anyone else you put in that spot. It's like you have two choices here. Either you put Nikita in the spot.
Sam Houston.
Could be Sam Houston. Yeah, you're not putting Ricky Morton in that spot. It's like who do you go to? Maybe you go to Ron Garvin, but we know how that worked out in '87. So I wouldn't go with Ron Garvin at this point. Like, who do you go with? Unless you're going to bring someone in from the outside.
Yeah, I mean,
unless you're going to bring in a Kerry Von Erich or something.
Yeah, I mean, of course they didn't do. I mean, what were your thoughts on this match? It went 20 minutes exactly.
Double DQ is lame as hell. It should have been clean. And this is my problem. I have a big problem.
Uh-oh.
I have a big problem with Dusty's booking in terms of this time where the rest of this card is fantastic, but the way he booked the NWA World Champion, he was literally stuck in 1975. I tell you this, 60-minute draws and Dusty finishes, double DQs, countouts are not good for a national promotion, especially on your Starrcade. This is your WrestleMania. This is your Super Bowl. And you're going to have your main event come to a double DQ?
Yeah, I don't understand.
Are you out of your mind?
I don't understand that. I mean, they've been doing that a lot recently in the WWE where they have the main event go to like a.
They wouldn't do that on WrestleMania though.
No, they wouldn't. They would never do that at WrestleMania. I mean, yeah, I don't understand.
Let Flair win. Just let Flair win. Just have Flair beat him.
But a double.
And then we move on.
But a double disqualification in the main event at your, like you said, at your Super Bowl I don't understand that. I understand
you're trying to protect Nikita here. I get that. But you can have him lose, foot on the rope. You can hold the tights. There's 1,000 different ways to do it. You don't need a double DQ here.
Yeah,
to me, it's ridiculous. And they kept on doing this with the NWA World Title. It hurt Flair and it hurt the belt, and eventually it would hurt the promotion overall.
Yeah, I don't understand. Okay, so they were...
See Lex Luger in 2 years.
Oh, Lex Luger. I mean, the funny thing is they were pushing Nikita to the kill. I mean, they gave him the U.S. title, but he never won the world title.
No.
I mean, do you think that was
These guys never beat Flair for the title. Barry Windham didn't do it. Nikita didn't do it. Lex didn't do it. The only person to ever kind of really do it was a new guy coming up or someone they were going to push was Sting.
Yeah, I mean, of course. I mean, they had
because Ron Garvin beat him for the belt, Ricky Steamboat, but those are only really, really short title runs.
Yeah, are you surprised that they gave the win to Ron Garvin for the title?
I mean, we'll talk about that when we do 87 at some point. But from what people say that who were around during that time, that they thought Ron would work because Ron was over. but he wasn't over in Chicago. So when the Chicago crowd kind of crapped on him, the rest of the country crapped on him too, which goes to show you, and I wish the modern WWE would do this, know your crowds, know your audiences, because the way professional wrestling has always worked, if something happens on television when you see it, you see a crowd reaction on television, that's how you're going to react when you go to the house shows. That's where you're going to react when you go when Raw comes to your town. So if like say you do a scenario where Roman Reigns gets booed on TV, well, what's going to happen when you go to the house show? He's going to get booed at the house show. Then he's going to get booed at the next Raw. So that was the issue with Ron Garvin, where Ron was over in Georgia and Ron was over in North Carolina, but the fact that they had that title switch in Chicago was the biggest issues there.
Yeah, I had a lot of issues with Ron Garvin, but like you said,
I love Ronnie Garvin. He's awesome. He's good for, he's a good, U.S. champion. He'd be a good television champion, good one half of the tag team champions.
He likes
NWA World Champion, not so much.
He likes to dress and drag. I don't.
He
judge.
Does. Listen and the lively.
I don't judge, but what were your overall thoughts on Starrcade '86? It was like you said, it was and I stated in the beginning.
This definitely the peak of Jim Crockett Promotions at its highest. Again, '87 was still pretty good, but it's a down year. '88 goes off the rails. So definitely the peak of Jim Crockett Promotions. If you could look at the cards from '86 in terms of your big events, would it be WrestleMania 2, the big event that was in Canada with Hogan and Orndorff on top? This show is a better show. Definitely a better show.
Yeah, it was definitely a better show. And speaking of shows, episode number 5, we kind of going to tease it coming up. We're going to talk about the fallout from Starrcade '86. Anything that you kind of want to preview going into next week's episode that people can look forward to? Kind of the fallout from everything that happened from Starrcade '86.
When we look at Starrcade '86, overall, it puts them in a really good spot for '87. Going into '87. You still have Flair on top. You have Nikita chasing him. You're obviously going to have Dusty chasing him, and what have you. And you head to War Games. We're all going to War Games at this point. So the problems in '87 start occurring in the middle of the year, and especially when they buy the UWF is where the issues lie for Jim Crockett Promotions. But I think this show shows how strong Dusty's booking here at the moment is.
Yeah,
and this is before they kind of betrayed Greensboro, and they were like, "Oh, we got to come out of Chicago." Like, no, if you stay in North Carolina and in Atlanta, you'd be fine.
Yeah, it was definitely a good show, and if people want to watch and hear a great show, of course, we're talking about your YouTube channel.
Yeah.
How can people that are listening, but of course, besides clicking at the bottom of the show notes, which would be the easiest thing, you don't have to remember anything, just click. But if they don't have a pencil, if for some strange reason they're not that don't have anything to write down on, how can they follow you? How can they find your YouTube channel?
So what you're going to do is you're going to go to YouTube, you're going to type in retro wrestling games, and will be the first thing that pops up. So you'll see our latest episode of the NWA 1984 project. You'll see our latest episode of Retro Wrestling Games Presents, which was WWF the WrestleMania, the arcade game. So those 2 videos are up and they're live as of right now. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, guys, I guarantee that I'm a good Twitter follow. It's at RW Games Presents. So definitely check me out on Twitter.
And anything else coming up soon on the YouTube channel? Any new projects, any new video games that you're super excited to be?
Well, we're going to do episode 13 of the NWA 1984 project, where we take a look at a lot of. That's going to be a good show. I'm not going to spoil it here, but episode 13 is going to be a lot of fun. In terms of our next video game project, it probably is going to look like it's going to be Saturday Night Slam Masters. Will be the next game that we review. That's a fantastic arcade game by Capcom. It's, and we're going to talk about it in great detail. So those are the 2 upcoming projects that we have for the YouTube channel.
They're definitely a great follow and a great listen. Of course, if you want to follow us on Twitter, we are at the BT Ropes RN. That's Beyond the Ropes Radio Network. And we have a brand new Instagram account that I just created this past week. We're at Retro Wrestling Rewind. And of course, if you want to follow us online at the .com, we are Beyond the Ropes Radio Network. And of course, if you want to hear and see the YouTube version of the show, just type in the old YouTube machine. We're the only one that the Retro Wrestling Rewind. We come up, and as this episode drops, we should have up 3 episodes of Retro Wrestling Rewind, the YouTube version. This past week, we had the Great American Bash 1981. We had World Class Championship Wrestling's Parade of Champions, second one, and the first one was WrestleMania 5. No, 7. 5-7, one of those numbers. I'm not very good at numbers. That's why I'm in TV.
We'll do 5 at some point. I love that show.
That's actually a great show. But for the great Alex G, I am David Fine. We will see you back here next week, same time, same podcast channel, where we look back and review the aftermath and the fallout from Starrcade 1986 right here on Retro Wrestling Rewind, exclusively on the Beyond the Ropes Radio Network.